he claimed the house was a mistake. Not the marriage, not the years, not the lies. The house. Like 3,200 square feet in Bellevue. A corner lot with white hydrangeas, a 3-car garage, and a mortgage drafted every first of the month could somehow appear out of thin air because of a clerical misunderstanding. He stood in my kitchen and said it with that calm, infuriating confidence he always used when he thought the truth could be edited after the fact. One hand on the marble island, suit jacket still on, tie loosened just enough to look exhausted, as if he were the one carrying something heavy. There was a mistake in how title was recorded, he said. My attorney is already handling it. I remember the hum of the refrigerator, the smell of coffee gone cold, the tiny click of the sprinkler system outside starting its cycle across the front lawn. Mistake. That was the word he chose for the home I had paid into for 11 years. The home where I had painted nursery walls alone while he was traveling for work. The home where I had refinanced my own student loans to keep us from missing payments the year his company bonuses mysteriously stopped showing up in our joint account. He expected me to panic. He expected tears, questions, maybe bargaining. Instead, I asked, "Which attorney?" That was the first moment his face changed, only slightly, just enough for me to see that he had prepared for resistance, but not precision. "Doesn't matter," he said. "What matters is fixing this before it gets uglier." Before it gets uglier, he said that while standing 6 feet from the drawer where I kept the closing file, the original settlement addendum, and the quiet little post-nuptial amendment he had signed 3 years ago in a leather chair after 2 glasses of Cabernet and one too many smug speeches about how much he trusted me. He thought I didn't understand documents because I didn't speak like a lawyer. He thought because I worked in hospital administration, because I kept schedules moving and budgets balanced and people calmer than they had any right to be, that I didn't understand leverage. He was wrong. The legal anchor came less than an hour later, not from him, but from Evergreen Title. A woman named Marissa left a voicemail at 8:43 a.m. saying they had received an urgent request for a corrective deed, along with a proposed affidavit claiming the marital residence had been incorrectly vested during our last refinance. She sounded professional, careful, almost apologetic. The kind of tone people use when they know they're walking toward a problem and hope not to step in it. I called back from my car in the hospital parking garage with my badge still around my neck. "What exactly was the request?" I asked. There was a pause, keyboard tapping. Then Marissa lowered her voice and said, "Your husband's counsel submitted paperwork asserting the property should have been titled solely to him due to a scrivener's error. We flagged it because the existing deed and the refinance package don't align with that claim. There's also a recorded interspousal transfer agreement from 2023. I closed my eyes. He had gone to title. He had gone after the recorded documents. Not just threats, not bluster. He was trying to rewrite the chain. "Do not process anything," I said. "We already placed a hold," she replied, "but you may want your attorney involved today." By 9:15, I was sitting in my office pretending to answer emails while my heartbeat kicked like a fist against my ribs. Bellevue General buzzed around me in its usual Monday rhythm. Rolling carts, clipped footsteps, overhead pages, the smell of disinfectant and too hot oatmeal from the staff lounge. People discussed staffing ratios and insurance authorizations, while my husband was apparently trying to erase my legal interest in the house from public record. And the worst part was, this was exactly his style. Not loud, not reckless, administrative violence. He liked harm that wore a blazer. His name was Grant Holloway, 43, corporate litigation partner, good teeth, clean shoes, the kind of man who held eye contact a little too long because he liked people to feel studied. He had spent most of our marriage teaching rooms to lean toward him. Restaurant hosts, mortgage brokers, school administrators, contractors, even our neighbors, especially our neighbors. In Lakemont Heights, appearances were currency. Wide sidewalks, Tesla chargers, backyard string lights, women in beige cashmere discussing kitchen remodels with the seriousness of treaty negotiations. Men who grilled salmon in pressed quarter zips and talked about the market as if they personally managed it. Grant fit there naturally. He knew how to perform certainty in a zip code built on it. I married him when I was 31 and still believed competence meant safety. I had a good job. He had a better one. We bought the Bellevue house 6 months after our wedding with a down payment that came from 3 places. My condo sale, his bonus, and a loan from my mother that I insisted we document, because even then some small part of me preferred paperwork to promises. Grant laughed when I asked for that promissory note. "You really do trust paper more than people," he said. He said it like it was a flaw. I signed because I thought marriage meant building something together. He signed because he assumed anything with both our names on it would still belong to him if he wanted it badly enough. At lunch, I called an attorney I hadn't spoken to in almost 4 years. Diane Mercer had handled a quiet matter for me after I found out Grant had opened a line of credit against his partnership distributions without mentioning it to me. He'd called it a business liquidity bridge. Diane called it what it was: concealed marital exposure. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Tell me everything," she said. So I did. The title company call, the corrective deed, the scrivener's error claim, the phrase mistake in how title was recorded. Diane didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she said, "Don't text him. Don't warn him. Send me every document you have, especially anything signed after the refinance. And Claire," her voice sharpened, "if he's trying to alter record title now, it means either he's desperate or something larger is coming. Something larger." At 3:40 that afternoon, Grant texted me. "We need to handle this like adults. Dinner tonight, not 'Are you okay?' Not 'We need to talk,' not 'There's been a misunderstanding. We need to handle this.' As if the house were a leak under the sink. As if he hadn't already moved a knife under the table. I wrote back, "Busy." He responded almost instantly, "Don't make me do this the hard way." I stared at the message until the words blurred. That was another thing about Grant. He loved the phrase "the hard way." He used it on vendors, junior associates, contractors, me. It let him imagine himself as reasonable, right up until the moment he became cruel. I got home after 7. Rain had started, soft, needling Seattle-side rain drifting east across the lake until the streetlights glowed through it like smudged gold. The house was dark except for the kitchen pendants. He was already there, pouring bourbon as if this were his stage, and I had arrived late for my scene. He didn't offer me a drink. "I talked to title," I said, dropping my keys into the bowl by the door. His shoulders stiffened, then relaxed. "Then you know this can be corrected quietly." "Corrected to what?" "To reflect reality." I laughed. I couldn't help it. It came out thinner than I wanted. Brittle at the edges. "Reality," I said. "You mean your revised version of it?" He took a slow sip. The house was never meant to be vested the way it is now. Funny, because I remember signing every page, You signed what was put in front of you. There it was. The insult under the explanation. The assumption that my signature existed in a fog. That I drifted through my own life half aware while he made meaning out of documents I merely touched. I stepped closer. No, I said. I signed what I read. For a second, a very small second, his eyes flicked to the drawer beside the stove where the copies were kept, then back to me. That glance told me everything. He wasn't sure what I had, and uncertainty was the first crack I'd seen in him all day. What do you want, Grant? He set down his glass. I want efficiency. I want this resolved before attorneys turn it into theater. You keep the investment account in your name, I keep the house, and we both stop pretending this marriage is salvageable. There are sentences that end marriages, and there are sentences that expose what the marriage actually was. I keep the house. Not let's separate, not maybe this is over, not we have to figure out what's fair. I keep the house. Like he had been waiting to say it for months, maybe years. I felt suddenly calm. It frightened me a little. How calm? You already decided all that? I asked. He nodded once. I've been advised. By which attorney? His mouth flattened. You don't know them? That's not what I asked. He picked up his glass again, irritation breaking through the polished surface. This doesn't need to become a spectacle, Claire. Too late, I thought. It already had. The escalation began with receipts, not metaphorically, actual receipts. Diane called me at 10:12 the next morning and asked if I was sitting down. I wasn't. I sat. Your husband's attorney of record on the title submission, she said, is not from his firm. I waited. She's from a boutique asset protection practice in Tacoma. And Claire, she filed a notice yesterday tied to a newly formed entity called GHH Residential Holdings LLC. My blood went cold. GHH? Grant Holloway Holdings, maybe something else. But it was registered 6 weeks ago. I pulled the formation records. He hadn't just decided to take the house. He had built a vehicle for it, quietly, methodically, weeks in advance, maybe longer. I pressed my fingers to my temple. Can he transfer it? Not cleanly. Not without your cooperation unless he tries fraud. And based on what I'm seeing, he may have already tested the edges. Diane sent me the formation filing, the registered agent information, and a copy of the request sent to title. The language was elegant in the way dangerous paperwork often is. A corrective measure, clarification of intended vesting, preservation of separate property interests. Nothing in it sounded like theft. That was the genius of men like Grant. They didn't steal like burglars. They stole like committee chairs. I barely slept that week. Every sound in the house became evidence of something shifting under me. Garage door, printer, his study door closing, the low buzz of his phone against the granite when messages came in after midnight. We moved around each other like diplomats from hostile states, pretending not to notice troop movement. Then came Thursday. I was halfway through a budget review meeting when my bank app sent an alert. Large transfer pending, $38,500, from joint checking to account ending in 4419. I stared at the screen so long, the CFO beside me asked if I was okay. I wasn't. Account ending 4419 was unfamiliar. Not one of ours. Not any household expense account. Not our daughter's education fund. Not the tax savings account I monitored every quarter. Just 4 numbers and a sum large enough to matter. I excused myself, walked straight into an empty stairwell, and called the bank. After 11 minutes of verification and hold music, A representative told me the transfer had been initiated online the prior evening and designated for an external business account recently linked through Grant's credentials. Business account. Of course. I asked the name. He couldn't give it over the phone without additional internal review, but he confirmed one thing that mattered. The request had been placed from an IP address associated with our home network. Grant was draining liquidity now, positioning cash, preparing for war. That evening, I opened the locked file box in the back of my closet and laid everything across the bed. Mortgage statements, refinance disclosures, wire confirmations, my mother's promissory note, and the cancellation letter I signed after paying her back from a bonus, a spreadsheet I'd maintained for years because somebody in this marriage had to know where the money actually went. And then, under a packet of insurance renewals, I found the envelope, thick cream paper, Diane's office seal, dated 3 years earlier. Inside was the post-nuptial amendment, not the general one we had both referenced casually over the years. The specific amendment executed after Grant's undisclosed credit line scare. The one he had insisted was unnecessary drama until Diane explained that if he wanted my agreement not to pursue immediate separation, he would memorialize certain protections. There it was in black and white. In the event of dissolution, concealment of debt, unauthorized encumbrance, or attempted transfer of the marital residence, the residence shall be allocated to Claire Holloway as her separate property, subject to mortgage adjustment and equalization elsewhere if applicable. I sat on the edge of the bed and read that line 3 times, then a 4th. He had signed it. I remembered the evening now with painful clarity. November rain, fire in the den, Grant in shirt sleeves, annoyed but charming, telling me Diane was overly cautious and we were never going to need any of it anyway. He signed because he thought the signatures were symbolic when he was in control. He thought real power lived somewhere else, in tone, position, intimidation, timing. He never imagined the clause would matter. He probably forgot it existed. Or maybe worse. He remembered and believed I had forgotten. When he came home, I was at the kitchen table with the amendment in front of me. He saw the paper and stopped. Not dramatically. Just one short pause at the threshold, a predator stepping on unfamiliar ground. "Where did you find that?" he asked. I folded my hands. "In my house." His jaw moved once. That document was superseded. No, it wasn't. Yes, Claire. It was part of a broader negotiation that was never finalized. Then why is it fully executed? He didn't answer. Why is Diane's certification attached? Still no answer. Why does it specifically cover attempted transfer of the marital residence? His face hardened. I watched the warmth leave him in layers, husband, performer, strategist, until what remained was simple resentment that the prop in front of him had not obeyed the script in his head. "That clause is unconscionable," he said. I almost smiled. Not invalid, not forged, not mistaken, unconscionable, a legal word, defensive, specific, desperate. "You remembered it after all," I said. His hand curled around the back of a dining chair. "You're not getting that house based on one predatory document drafted during a temporary dispute." "One predatory document?" I repeated. "You tried to move title through an LLC. That was contingency planning. You moved money for legal expenses. You told title the deed was a mistake. Because it was." The shouting started there, real shouting. Years of polished conversation splitting open under fluorescent light and rain tapping the windows above the sink. He accused me of ambushing him. I accused him of fraud. He said I was emotional. I said he was cornered. He slammed his palm against the counter hard enough to rattle the fruit bowl. Upstairs, our daughter's bedroom stayed silent. Emma was at a sleepover. Thank God. He leaned toward me, voice suddenly low. You think one clause saves you? You have no idea what this will cost. I met his stare. I think cost is the first thing you understand. He left the room without finishing his drink. The next week became discovery without formal discovery. Diane moved fast. She recorded a notice of interest against the property, sent preservation letters, and got emergency injunctive relief queued in case he tried anything more aggressive. Her emails were concise and lethal. Meanwhile, Grant began his campaign. He slept in the guest room. He started coming home later. He mentioned my instability twice in front of neighbors, casually, with that careful concern men use when they want rumors to sound like empathy. He forwarded school calendar items with strange little notes about consistency for Emma. He asked whether I was sure I could manage the mortgage on one income. That one almost made me laugh. The mortgage had been paid on time for a decade because I tracked it, scheduled it, and covered gaps when his numbers didn't land the way he promised they would. But Grant believed income was the same thing as security because his name came with prestige. He didn't understand that actual control lives in systems, passwords, calendars, paper trails, payment histories, metadata, timing. He had always thought I was merely organized. He didn't realize I was archival. 2 Fridays later, something bigger arrived. A process server handed me a packet in the hospital lobby at 7:18 a.m., right between the coffee kiosk and the volunteer desk. Petition for dissolution. Request for exclusive use of marital residence. Motion alleging the house had been erroneously characterized due to documentation, irregularities, and disproportionate separate contribution by husband. There it was, in official language, clean, polished, absurd. I took the elevator to the 4th floor with the packet in my hand and that old strange calm rising again from somewhere deep and cold. He had filed first. He thought that mattered more than filing correctly. Diane called after reading it and made a sound halfway between annoyance and admiration. He's aggressive, she said. He's theatrical. He's also vulnerable. How? The motion overreaches. He attached incomplete financial exhibits. Incomplete how? She exhaled softly. The partnership income disclosures reference distributions that don't match the tax summaries from prior years. I leaned against the wall outside pediatrics. Meaning? Meaning either he's understating now, or he hid income then. It got uglier fast. Subpoenas, forensic accountant, emergency hearing dates, calendar blocks at work rearranged with humiliating efficiency while I tried to keep my life from becoming hallway gossip. Grant, meanwhile, became more polished in public, the worse he behaved in private. He brought muffins to Emma's Saturday soccer game. He laughed easily with other parents. He told one of the coaches that Claire and I are working through some paperwork, like we were discussing patio permits instead of asset warfare. At home, he stripped the art from the den wall because it had come from his mother. He removed the second garage opener from my key ring. He changed the streaming passwords and then texted them to Emma only. Petty things, small punctures. Proof that even when he couldn't seize the whole house, he wanted me to feel less at home inside it. Then, because cruelty is rarely efficient enough on its own, he escalated to money again. The first clue came from an email our CPA accidentally copied me on. Subject line: Revised K1 support. It was meant for Grant and someone from his firm's finance department. I could tell from the reply chain below. Attached were tax schedules I hadn't seen before. Numbers larger than any distributions Grant had ever reported to me during our annual let's see what we owe conversations at the kitchen island. Larger by a lot. I forwarded it to Diane within seconds. By evening, she had looped in forensic accountant Daniel Wu, who called me from a 206 number and said, "I think your husband may have two problems, one marital and one tax." I sat down. Daniel walked me through it carefully. Partnership distributions, retained earnings, capital accounts, side allocations. He translated the language so I could feel the shape of it. Over at least 3 years, Grant appeared to have routed a portion of performance compensation through deferred structures and entity reimbursements not clearly reflected in the household income summaries he provided during refinancing and internal marital budgeting discussions. "In plain English?" I asked. "In plain English," Daniel said. "The money may be real even if he made it look unavailable." "How much?" "Too early to say, but not small." That night, Grant found me in the laundry room, holding my phone and smiling for the first time in weeks. He noticed. It unsettled him. "What?" he asked. I folded one of Emma's sweatshirts with ridiculous care. "Nothing." He studied me. Grant was most dangerous when he didn't understand the room. "What did Mercer find?" I looked up. "You tell me." His expression shifted. Not fear exactly, but pressure. A tightening at the corners. A man sensing an elevator cable shiver. "Be careful, Claire," he said. "You may not like where that road goes." I set the sweatshirt down. "You first." At the temporary orders hearing, he arrived in navy wool and moral confidence. I arrived with binders. Diane liked binders. So did I. Tabs, chronology, bank records, title record copies, the post-nup amendment, screen captures of the transfer alerts, emails, the LLC formation. Every attempt he had made to turn momentum into ownership. The commissioner was a woman with silver hair, sharp glasses, and the energy of someone who had seen too many rich people weaponize paperwork to be impressed by tailored remorse. She listened. She asked questions. She flipped slowly through exhibits like each page offended her in a slightly different way. Grant's attorney argued Scrivener's error, separate contribution, original intent, administrative inconsistency. Diane argued conduct, not theory, conduct, attempted off-record correction, liquidity movement, entity formation, concealment, executed marital agreement. When the post-nup amendment hit the bench, Grant actually leaned toward his attorney, just slightly. But I saw it. So did Diane. The commissioner read the clause once, then again. She asked Grant's counsel whether they were contesting execution. Not interpretation. Execution. Counsel said they reserved all rights, which was lawyer language for "we cannot say it's fake without risking worse things later." Temporary exclusive possession was denied to both parties pending further review. No unauthorized transfers. No new encumbrances. Mutual financial restraints. Full disclosure within 10 business days. Not the victory I wanted, but not the win he expected. Outside the courtroom, under harsh county building lights, Grant caught up to me near the elevators. His voice was low and furious. "You had that waiting." "Yes." "You buried it." "No." "I kept it." He looked at me like he had just discovered there was a second staircase in a house he thought he designed. "You want to burn everything down over a clause?" I held his stare. "You already lit the match when you called my home a mistake." The disclosures came in pieces. That was how men like Grant hoped to survive them. Never one clean confession. Always fragments. one account at a time, one explanation at a time, one oversight with a polished apology attached. But Daniel kept mapping the fragments until the gaps themselves became evidence. There was the LLC. There was the external transfer account. There were 2 private equity side payments labeled consulting support. There was an interest in a vacation rental partnership in Arizona I had never heard of. There was a line item for capital returned from a firm-affiliated investment vehicle that somehow never appeared in our household planning conversations. There were reimbursement flows through his firm that obscured compensation timing. And then there was the home equity line, a dormant HELOC, apparently opened against the Bellevue property 18 months earlier. My stomach dropped when Daniel told me. A HELOC, I said. That requires signatures? Yes. I never signed a HELOC. There was silence on the line. Then Daniel said, very carefully, that's what concerns me. I drove to Diane's office in downtown Seattle through cold gray rain and traffic crawling over I-90 like tired metal insects. By the time I got there, she already had the preliminary file from the lender. Some documents were legitimate. One was not. My signature on the HELOC draw authorization looked almost right until you studied the angle of the Y, the pressure on the T, the lazy straight line where my usual looping L should have been. Good enough for a hurried processor, not good enough for me. Not good enough for Diane either. He used the house, I said. My own voice sounded far away. He opened the line without telling you, Diane replied, and the funds appear to have supported either his separate investments or undisclosed obligations. I stared at the forged signature until it blurred. All those nights he had assured me cash flow was tighter because of tax holdbacks. All those moments I had adjusted spending, delayed repairs, moved bonus money toward the mortgage, agreed to wait on replacing the downstairs flooring because he said liquidity was weird this quarter. He had been using the house as collateral behind my back, not just trying to take it now. Using it then, that was the big twist. The one everything else had been circling. He didn't suddenly decide the house was a mistake. The house was the cover. If he could reclassify it, isolate it, move it into his control, then the HELOC exposure, the forged authorization, and the concealed draws could be framed as his separate management of his own asset, rather than fraudulent use of a jointly protected marital residence. The whole title play wasn't about ego. Not only ego, it was damage containment. The room felt smaller. The city outside Diane's windows looked washed to steel. Ferries moving slow across Elliott Bay, under a sky the color of unmailed apologies. He knows this could be criminal, I said. Diane nodded once. Potentially. And he still filed? He probably hoped to force a settlement before anyone got to this layer. I laughed then. One sharp sound. That was Grant in a sentence. Force a settlement before anyone got to this layer. He had built his whole adult life on the idea that ordinary people get tired before the truth gets organized. He had simply misjudged what kind of woman he married. We didn't tell him immediately. Diane believed in sequence. We amended our discovery requests. We demanded lender communications. We sought device production tied to document execution. We put the HELOC in play without showing our full hand. Daniel continued tracing where the draws went. One portion funded the Arizona partnership. One appeared to service a personal guarantee issue related to a client-adjacent investment Grant had no business touching. Another seemed to cover shortfalls from GHH Residential Holdings LLC before the entity had any legitimate assets at all. he had borrowed against our house to prop up the shell he planned to use to take it. Even for Grant, that was almost poetic. The escalation after that became personal in a new way. He started sleeping elsewhere some nights and refusing to say where. Emma asked whether Daddy had a trial. I said he was busy with work. My daughter was 13, old enough to hear tone, young enough to deserve protection from it. She began watching us with the quiet vigilance of children who sense weather before adults admit there's a storm. One Sunday morning, she found me in the pantry, staring at canned soup as if it might explain my life. "Are we moving?" she asked. I turned too quickly. "Why would you think that?" She shrugged, all awkward long limbs and hurt, trying not to become need. Dad said houses change hands when people make mistakes. For a second, I couldn't breathe. Not because of the manipulation. That part was predictable. Because he had put the word mistake into her mouth. I crouched down until we were eye level. "Emma," I said very gently, "this house is not a mistake. None of this is your fault, and no one gets to scare you with grown-up paperwork." Her chin trembled once, then steadied. She nodded like she was memorizing instructions in an emergency drill. That night I called Diane and told her I was done playing elegant. 2 weeks later, the lender's document custodian turned over metadata and notary records. The notary stamp on the HELOC draw packet belonged to a mobile notary who had, according to her own log, never met me. She had met Grant at his office, alone. The signature page she stamped had already been signed when presented. That was the moment the case changed shape. Civil dispute became potential fraud exposure. Diane moved for sanctions, attorney fees, and referral language. Grant's counsel requested an urgent settlement conference. Of course they did. Because once paper stops behaving like theory, people who spent months acting invincible suddenly rediscover the beauty of compromise. The conference took place in a private room overlooking Lake Union. Glass walls, weak coffee, a tray of dry pastries nobody touched. Grant entered with a new expression I had never seen on him before. He looked expensive and tired. Real tired, not curated tired. Not strategic fatigue designed to win sympathy. This was the fatigue of a man who had finally located the floor of the hole he dug. He didn't sit near me. His attorney did most of the talking. Proposals, equalization payments, structured buyout options, confidential resolution language, mutual non-disparagement. Diane listened, then slid one sheet across the table. Not a counteroffer, a summary. Recorded title history, executed post-nup clause, LLC formation chronology, HELOC evidence, question signature, notary inconsistency, undisclosed transfers, potential tax disclosure issues reserved. No theatrics, just sequence. Grant read it in silence. I watched his eyes move line by line. When he got to the HELOC section, something inside him seemed to fold. Not publicly, not in a cinematic way, just inward. The kind of collapse only people who know each other intimately can recognize. A private failure of structure. He set the paper down. "What do you want?" he asked me. Not Diane. Me. There it was. The shift. I thought about every condescending smile, every controlled explanation, every time he used the hard way like a weapon. Every year I made myself smaller to preserve calm. He was busy monetizing somewhere else. Then I thought about Emma upstairs in her room, asking if we were moving, and I answered simply, "The house." He closed his eyes for one full second. Claire, the house, full release, HELOC indemnity, disclosure warranties, my fees, parenting schedule with no poison in it, And if I find out later there's another hidden account or another lie tied to this property, I keep the right to reopen financial claims. His attorney started to speak. Diane cut in. Given the record, she said, that's restrained. Grant looked at me like he wanted to find the woman he had always relied on, the one who preferred harmony to confrontation, the one who might soften if he used the right tone. She wasn't there anymore. Or maybe she was. Maybe this was simply what she looked like with enough evidence in her hands. He laughed once, quietly, no humor in it. All this over a house, he said. No, I replied. All this because you thought I wouldn't read what you signed. The settlement negotiation stretched another week. He resisted the fee number, tried to limit warranties, wanted language preserving dignity. Of course he did. Men who will mortgage your life behind your back always want dignified wording on the way out. But pressure was working on him from several directions now. His firm had begun internal review after subpoena-related whispers reached the wrong ears. Daniel's tax concerns loomed. The notary problem was toxic. Most of all, the houseplay had failed. The title correction fantasy was dead. By the final mediation session, the power reversal was complete. Not loud, not flashy. Complete. He no longer talked over me. He no longer used the word mistake. He no longer said the hard way. He asked for clarification. He requested timelines. He wanted to know whether certain language would satisfy lender cooperation, so the HELOC could be refinanced out under his sole responsibility. He wanted, desperately, for the exit door to remain shaped like professionalism instead of exposure. I gave him that much. Not for him, for Emma, for me, for the future version of my own nervous system that deserved at least one ending without shattered glass. The final agreement awarded me the Bellevue house, subject to mortgage restructuring and a defined equalization offset against other assets that, once fully disclosed, were less impressive than Grant had spent years pretending. I received fee reimbursement. He assumed sole responsibility for the HELOC-related fallout and signed extensive representations regarding undisclosed liabilities. The Arizona partnership interest stayed with him. So did the shadowy LLC and whatever pride he could salvage from its paperwork coffin. When we left the mediator's office, Seattle had finally broken into one of those impossible late spring evenings that make the whole city look forgiven. Blue over the water, light on glass towers, seaplanes angling low like silver insects. Grant stood beside me outside the building entrance and said, "You could have destroyed me." I looked at him for a long moment. He meant professionally, financially, socially. He did not mean emotionally, because that part had happened years earlier, and he had mistaken the silence afterward for survival. "You tried to use my home as collateral, and then call it an error," I said. "Let's not rewrite who showed up with matches." He nodded once. His face had aged in the last month, not dramatically, just enough to reveal what strain subtracts when charm stops covering it. Then he said the strangest thing. "I really did think you'd just want peace." I almost answered quickly. Almost. Instead, I let the truth arrive at full size. "I did want peace," I said. "You just confused that with surrender." He had no reply. 3 months later, I stood in the driveway while movers took the last of his box things from the garage. The hydrangeas had come in early, huge and absurdly alive along the front walk. Emma sat on the porch with our golden retriever's head in her lap, pretending not to watch. Grant supervised nothing. He signed inventory sheets. He avoided my eyes. He left. That was the last power he lost. the power to make departure feel like punishment. Inside, the house sounded different, quieter, not empty, just honest. I opened windows, washed the kitchen counters, replaced the bar stools he had chosen because they looked expensive and hurt to sit on for more than 10 minutes. I changed the study paint from charcoal to a warm off-white and turned it into a homework and bills room where paper meant safety again. There were consequences beyond the marriage, though I only learned them in pieces. Grant took an extended leave from his firm. The internal review became formal. Whether anything criminal happened was never something I chased publicly. Diane had been clear on my leverage, and I had used it where it mattered most. Securing my daughter's home, my own solvency, and a clean legal perimeter around the damage he created. I didn't need a spectacle. I needed a foundation. That summer, Emma and I repainted her room a soft green and planted tomatoes by the side fence. She stopped asking whether we were moving. She started inviting friends over again. Laughter returned first in flashes, then in full stretches. Until one evening, I heard her singing to herself upstairs and had to sit down at the kitchen island because relief hit harder than grief ever did. People in the neighborhood adjusted quickly, as people do. Some avoided details with the aggressive politeness of affluent suburbs. Others tried gentle fishing expeditions over mailbox small talk. I kept it simple. We worked out the house. That was enough. Marissa from Evergreen Title sent a brief email after the final deed confirmation recorded in my sole name. Just 3 lines. Congratulations. Glad the record now reflects the correct ownership. Take care. I printed it and tucked it into the closing file behind the settlement agreement in the post-nup amendment. Not because I needed proof anymore, because I had learned what paper can do when someone finally respects it enough to keep it. On the first quiet Sunday after everything closed, I made coffee before dawn and sat alone at the kitchen table while the house settled around me. Pipes ticking faintly, refrigerator humming. Morning light barely touching the edges of the yard. No tension moving in the hallway. No calculations wearing a human face. Just stillness. I thought about the word he had chosen in the beginning. Mistake. It had seemed ridiculous at first, insulting, almost laughable in its arrogance. But sitting there with both hands around a warm mug and the legal file within reach if I wanted it, I realized something. He was right about one thing. A mistake had been made. Not by the title company, not by the recorder's office, not by a stray document or some technical flaw in vesting. His mistake was older than that. He mistook kindness for ignorance. He mistook patience for passivity. He mistook organization for obedience. He mistook a woman who kept the family running for a woman who could be edited out of the record. He mistook my silence while I was gathering facts for weakness. And that was the most expensive mistake of his life. The house was never a clerical accident. It was the clearest evidence there had ever been that I was there the whole time. Reading, paying, noticing, remembering, even when he preferred the version of the marriage where only his signature counted. By the time the sun came fully up over Bellevue, the windows glowed gold and the hydrangeas outside looked almost white. Emma came downstairs in socks, hair wild, asking what was for breakfast. I told her pancakes. She smiled. The dog barked once at a squirrel. Somewhere down the street, a garage door opened and a normal day began. I stood in my kitchen, my actual kitchen, and reached for the mixing bowl. No dramatic soundtrack, no courtroom applause, no final speech anyone else would ever hear. Just flour, butter, a bright room, a daughter who felt safe enough to be hungry, and a house that no longer had to survive anybody's version of the truth except mine.